My name is Eliza Himenez, and I've spent 32 years figuring out where I belong. Most of the time, that meant floating on the edges of family gatherings, the invisible extra chair no one remembered to pull out. So when my sister Danielle texted me on a Thursday afternoon, it wasn't excitement I felt, it was the familiar twinge of dread. "Just come for a casual family brunch," the message read. "We'll make room." The words were meant to soothe, to sound welcoming, but I heard a warning instead. A subtle reminder that in Danielle's world, there's always a place for her favorites, and a corner somewhere for me, if she bothers to find it. Still, I typed back, "Sure. I'll be there." Not because I expected a warm welcome, but because I needed to see it clearly this time. Without excuses. Without hope disguised as denial. I arrived 15 minutes early, parking my car along the quiet street and taking a moment to steady myself. The sun was barely warm on my face, and the faint smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery reminded me of all the family brunches I'd silently endured. I straightened my coat, adjusted my bag, and walked up the front steps with a calm that belied the storm in my chest. Through the open window, I saw them. Danielle had already claimed the head of the table, her husband's arm casually draped around her chair. My parents were laughing at something Kevin said, while my brother Nate's fiancée was animatedly waving her hands mid-story. 9 people. 9 perfectly arranged seats around a rectangular wooden table. Not one extra chair. Not one plate for me. I stood there for a moment, watching. Watching laughter spill across the table, the clinking of cutlery, the easy intimacy I'd never been part of. I'd walked into a room that rehearsed life without me, and I was painfully aware of it. The walls seemed smaller, the air heavier, and every smile felt like a spotlight highlighting my absence. Finally, my mother noticed. She looked up from her wine glass, offering a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. That smile you give a stranger who is politely waiting for something that's not really theirs. "Over there," she said softly, gesturing to a tall bar stool tucked beside a small side table cluttered with dirty glasses and leftover condiments. The offer wasn't gentle. It wasn't even considerate. It was a conclusion dressed as civility. I didn't argue. I didn't hesitate. I simply walked over and perched on the stool, the wooden rungs pressing against my legs. From there, I could see everything I wasn't part of. Danielle tossing her hair back in laughter, Kevin leaning in as if the conversation revolved around him, Nate pouring mimosa after mimosa like this was a celebration and not just a brunch. I ordered a simple coffee and held it like a shield, letting the bitter warmth ground me. Each sip was a quiet acknowledgement. I was here, and I was choosing this moment to witness it fully. I watched them pass plates, refill drinks, and share stories that didn't include me, and I realized I'd been expecting it all along. That hurt, once sharp, softened into clarity. The brunch continued, oblivious to my presence. The server passed, unasked, refilled the table, and glanced briefly at me as if to check whether I had any needs. I didn't. I just sat, coffee in hand, absorbing the subtle cruelty of being included in name only. Danielle's smile, my parents' murmured comments, Nate's casual gestures, all reminders that no one had thought about me beyond the perfunctory invitation. And yet, for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. The corner of the room was mine. Temporarily mine. And with that, something inside me began to shift. The quiet humiliation was no longer mine to carry alone. It was visible, undeniable, and for the first time, I didn't have to fight to erase it. The table laughed again, the way it always did. And I, sitting on my stool, finally let myself watch. Not with hope, not with resentment, just observation. This was the truth, and I would remember it clearly. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth soak into my hands as if it could shield me from the sting of invisibility. Danielle leaned forward, laughing at something Kevin said, and the sound filled the room like it had been custom-built for everyone but me. Plates were passed, cutlery clinked, wine glasses tapped together mid-toast, and I sat there, perched on my stool, a spectator at a table that moved seamlessly without needing me. I tried to disappear into the background, but the very act of standing still made me hyper-aware of my surroundings. Every laugh, every raised eyebrow, every casual nudge between family members felt like it was magnified just for me. Even my parents, who usually noticed when I was near, seemed to have rehearsed ignoring my presence. The realization hit me quietly but sharply. I was never truly included here. Not in laughter, not in conversation, not in the rituals of family life. Kevin's girlfriend, a bubbly presence who seemed to have an unspoken map for every social interaction, leaned toward the table and whispered a joke into Kevin's ear. Danielle laughed so loudly her hand flew to her mouth, eyes sparkling with amusement. Nate, ever eager to maintain the illusion of control, poured another round of mimosas with the precision of a bartender at a wedding. My parents were leaning in, captivated, their attention reserved for anyone who wasn't me. I could have walked away then. I could have left before enduring the formalities of brunch, before subjecting myself to the silent assessment of my worth in that room. But I didn't. I stayed, taking note of the dynamics, mentally cataloging each small gesture that reminded me where I fit. The corner of the room, the overlooked toast, the unoffered seat. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet the sum of it pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't ignore. The server returned, refilling Danielle's water glass and sliding a plate of croissants closer to the head of the table. I caught her eye and smiled faintly, trying to convey a sense of, "I'm fine here." She nodded politely and moved along, as if acknowledging that yes, Eliza was present, and yes, she was expected to sit quietly in her assigned spot. And in that moment, clarity began to bloom inside me. The embarrassment I had always carried, the small shame of feeling like a guest in my own family, wasn't truly mine to bear. It had always been theirs who orchestrated these gatherings, who decided who belonged where, who assigned roles at a table I had once thought I was a part of. I leaned back on the stool, tracing the rim of my coffee cup, observing the effortless choreography of my family. Danielle was animated, radiant, performing the hostess role as if she'd been born for it. Kevin was charming, an extension of her narrative. Nate, forever eager to follow the script, kept the conversation flowing smoothly. And I was the extra, the invisible measure of their perfection. And then, without warning, it struck me, this wasn't just brunch. It was a test, not of my patience or endurance, but of my willingness to accept being small. The quiet, "we'll make room" was not generosity, it was an expectation. The assumption that I would slide into the margins, take my coffee, smile politely, and leave without claiming a place that had always been mine. I let that thought settle. Not with anger, not with tears, but with a measured calm. I realized I had been conditioned to carry the shame for decades, to internalize their choices as my failure. But now, observing them from the corner, I could see clearly. This was not my burden anymore. When Danielle reached across the table to tap Kevin on the arm, laughing at something inconsequential, I let myself smile. Not at the joke, not at her, not at the table, but at the truth. I was no longer required to shrink. I could sit, I could observe, I could exist without apology or explanation. By the time the brunch reached its midpoint, small plates of pastries and fruit had made their rounds. Kevin's girlfriend insisted on trying everything, and the table's attention shifted momentarily, but never toward me. I ordered another coffee, feeling the bitter warmth anchor me to reality. The server brought it promptly, unaware that this simple action marked a shift. I was no longer waiting for them to notice me. I was noticing myself. The turning point came quietly, almost imperceptibly. When Danielle leaned back, laughing too hard, brushing crumbs from her skirt, I realized I didn't need acknowledgement. I didn't need a seat at that table to validate my worth. And for the first time, the humiliation didn't sting. It was just another fact, observable, manageable, powerless against the resolve growing inside me. I knew in that silent moment that the brunch was over before it even ended. Not in the sense of time, but in the sense of influence. I could leave, I could stay, but I would no longer be the invisible participant of their performance. Something inside me had shifted, quietly but irrevocably, and the rest of the brunch unfolded under my calm gaze, without altering the inevitable change that had begun. By mid-afternoon, the brunch had reached its predictable rhythm. Danielle was effortlessly commanding attention, her laughter echoing off the walls. Nate was pouring drinks, making sure everyone felt included, everyone except me. The tiny bar stool in the corner had become my observatory, a vantage point to watch the intricate choreography of a family that had never truly made room for me. I stirred my coffee, noting the delicate swirl of cream that refused to settle, and realized how long I'd been here, in these margins. For 32 years, I had carried the invisible weight of being overlooked, of silently tolerating subtle slights that no one else noticed. And now, for the first time, I didn't feel obligated to carry it anymore. The turning point didn't arrive with a dramatic statement. It arrived quietly, like the click of a lock snapping shut. Danielle reached for the last croissant, and without looking at me she said, "Don't worry about grabbing one, Eliza. There's plenty for everyone." The words were polite, but the tone made it clear I was not counted in her everyone. I didn't respond verbally. I just watched her break the croissant and hand it across to Kevin. That was my first conscious choice. I would no longer react to small indignities. I would observe, measure, and act only when it mattered. When the server approached again, bringing another round of drinks and setting down extra plates, I caught her eye. Without saying a word, I asked for my check. Not loudly. Not angrily. Calmly, with a tone that implied, "I see everything, and I will not participate in your performance any longer than necessary." The server hesitated, glancing at Danielle and Nate. The murmured chaos at the table had no idea I had requested the bill. That small act, quiet as it was, shifted the atmosphere around me. I wasn't openly challenging anyone. Yet the invisible power dynamic had subtly shifted. For the first time, I was quietly asserting myself. When the check arrived, I handled it with calm precision. I placed my card down and instructed the server, "Please apply the rest of the charges to table 7. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I simply nodded, the kind of nod that signaled authority without aggression. She hesitated only briefly, then complied. As I left the brunch, walking out with my latte unfinished, I felt a strange liberating weight lift off my shoulders. No one had acknowledged my action yet, but that didn't matter. The first ripple of consequences had begun. I didn't need applause or gratitude. I only needed clarity of action, the quiet demonstration that I would no longer endure the pattern of invisibility. The ride home was filled with silence and reflection. My phone buzzed once, twice, but I didn't answer. I knew the messages were coming from a place of confusion, maybe anger, maybe guilt, but they were not for me. I was no longer negotiating my worth with people who had long ago decided it for themselves. That evening, I sat on my porch, mug in hand, and allowed myself to feel the small victory of control. For the first time, I could witness my family's orchestrated world from the outside, unaffected, observing how their laughter, their gestures, their subtle maneuvers had failed to diminish me. I had taken a single quiet action, but it carried more weight than decades of polite endurance. By bedtime, the ripple of that quiet act had already reached its audience. Messages started appearing on my phone. Nate's frantic texts, Danielle's clipped demands, even a tentative call from my mother. I didn't respond. I let the notifications pile up, each one a testament to the fact that my presence or absence now mattered in a way it never had before. I realized something crucial. Humiliation only works if the person being humiliated participates. And for the first time, I wasn't participating. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't apologizing for taking up space at a table I had every right to occupy. In that calm refusal, I found power, not loud, not vindictive, but absolute in its subtlety. That night, Lucas noticed the difference before I even spoke about it. He leaned back in his chair, laptop open but forgotten, and said quietly, "You've changed. You're not carrying it anymore." And he was right. I wasn't. It was the quiet first act, the small but deliberate choice to assert control, that set everything into motion. I understood then that the real confrontation hadn't yet happened at the brunch table. It was already underway within me. And I was ready. The next morning, the silence was almost deafening. No messages, no group texts, no passive-aggressive good mornings. Just a thick, deliberate quiet that felt heavier than the laughter of the previous day. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, tracing the rim of my mug as if grounding myself to the moment. Lucas worked beside me, quietly observing, sensing the tension that had begun to coalesce like a storm just out of sight. And then came the first ripple. A hesitant knock at the door, polite yet carrying the unmistakable weight of expectation. Danielle. I knew her knock before I opened the door. It was loud, assertive, demanding recognition. She stood on my porch, iced coffee in hand from that downtown cafe, the one that prints your name in gold on the cup. Status in plastic form. Her signature move. "I paid that bill," she announced, her voice sharp, demanding reaction. "Over $1,300, she said, as if that was supposed to humiliate me. I leaned against the hallway wall, letting her words hang in the air, and said nothing. She waited. Not for long. She expected outrage, maybe tears, or at least a muttered apology. I gave her none. You embarrassed Nate, she continued, voice rising slightly. You embarrassed all of us. How could you do that? I finally looked at her. Calm, steady. I didn't embarrass anyone, I said softly. I finally stopped absorbing damage quietly. Her expression faltered, searching for leverage. I had removed it. For decades, I had absorbed slight after slight, but this time, I had decided I was done. Danielle's fury, usually a source of intimidation, couldn't reach me. You could have said something, she hissed. Instead, you acted selfishly, spoiled, dramatic. I shook my head. Selfish? I asked. You mean sitting me on a bar stool like a stranger at my own family's table, ignoring me the entire time, and acting like it's perfectly normal? That's not selfish. That's entitlement. She blinked, momentarily silenced. I had spoken my truth, and it struck her harder than any raised voice could. She opened her mouth again, searching for another line of attack, then faltered. Lucas, calm and deliberate, stepped forward. No, he said evenly, not looking at her. She's tired. You're upset because this is your routine, expecting her to be small so you feel bigger. That's not her problem. Danielle's face flushed. I'm not talking to you, she snapped, but even her words carried the weight of disbelief. Lucas didn't step back. He never needed to. The dynamic had shifted. She was no longer the orchestrator of control. You don't get to call her selfish, he continued. When you've been living in a house she owns, with utilities covered and financial support provided, all while pretending you're the generous one. You've lost sight of the truth, Danielle. The room, once hers to command, had become still. Danielle's eyes, wide and searching, finally settled on me. You told him? She asked, her voice tight, almost incredulous. I shrugged lightly. You never asked. She paused, looking for sympathy, for leverage, for a crack in my calm facade. Finding none, she scoffed. Wow. So this is it. You humiliate us and then send your boyfriend to fight your battles. I shook my head. No, I said quietly. This is me standing in my own house. I don't need anyone to fight for me. I can do it myself. Her laughter was sharp, almost dismissive. You think this makes a statement? Overreacting over one seat. One seat. I echoed, the phrase tasting bitter and satisfying on my tongue after years of being overlooked. After a lifetime of standing while everyone else sat comfortably? That's all it was to you. She shook her head like I was exhausting her, like she couldn't believe someone could finally refuse the role assigned to them. You're really doing this? Yes, I said firmly. You're not my measure. This ends here. Now. I motioned toward the door. I'm asking you to leave. She hesitated, fury and disbelief warring across her face. But the authority in my voice, in my calm, measured stance, left no room for negotiation. Slowly, she stormed past Lucas, muttering under her breath, the door closing behind her with a soft, final click. The silence afterward felt different. Cleaner. Purged. Lucas turned to me and said, "Ready to stop pretending this is temporary?" I nodded. For the first time in years, I felt the clarity of a boundary firmly drawn. No more minor humiliations. No more invisible roles. The confrontation had been brief, precise, undeniable. I had claimed control, not with drama or shouting, but with calm, deliberate assertion. Later, I drafted an email to formally end financial support and give a clear notice for vacating the house. Professional. Brief. Final. No exceptions. Backbone over polish. By the evening, my phone buzzed endlessly, Danielle, Nate, Mom, but I let the calls go to voicemail. Each notification a testament to the fact that the power dynamic had finally shifted, and I wasn't picking up to participate in their chaos. For the first time, I understood. Confrontation didn't require theatrics. It required clarity, consistency, and the courage to let silence carry the weight of truth. The hours and days that followed were quieter than I anticipated, yet heavy with tension. Danielle's absence was noticeable, not in guilt, but in the way she refused to engage. No messages, no calls, just the absence of her usual presence. I expected an onslaught, but what came instead was the subtle creeping pressure of realization. Emails arrived first. Nate, careful with words but desperate to regain control, tried to reason. Eliza, this went too far. We need to talk before it escalates. Danielle's messages followed, each one a mixture of indignation and thinly veiled accusations. You humiliated us. You embarrassed everyone at brunch. You overreacted. How could you? My mother tried diplomacy through text. Families don't treat each other this way. Please reconsider. Let's talk. I didn't respond. Not out of fear, not out of anger, but because I had clarity. I knew that responding would only reopen doors I had closed permanently. My silence became my shield. Within 48 hours, the stakes were raised. Danielle attempted to rewrite the narrative, crafting a story where I was unstable, dramatic, and unreasonable. She left out the facts. The financial support I had provided for years, the house I had allowed her and her husband to occupy without question, and the repeated instances of subtle exclusion and humiliation. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I consulted a lawyer. Not in panic, but in preparation. I wanted the record straight, clear, formal. Any further claims Danielle or Nate made would be met with documentation and authority. When the lawyer sent the initial notice confirming the end of financial support and the 2-week notice to vacate, I felt a weight lift I hadn't realized I was carrying. The first visit was unexpected. Nate showed up at my workplace, unannounced. Eliza, you can't destroy family over brunch, he said, voice tight with frustration and disbelief. I looked at him once calmly and replied, out. No argument. No speech. Just clarity. He left, visibly stunned, realizing I would not negotiate the space I had claimed for myself. Danielle escalated next. She came by, driving slowly past the house, phone in hand, sending texts and calling with urgent, desperate tones. Lucas observed quietly, commenting only once. She's performing. Don't engage. And I didn't. I refused to participate in the drama, the manipulation, the narrative she was attempting to impose. Over the week, other family members inserted themselves. Distant cousins offering advice, friends of Danielle chiming in with opinions. Each interaction was carefully filtered. Numbers blocked, voicemails left unanswered, messages read but ignored. The lesson was clear. When you've been treated like a stranger long enough, you stop negotiating your presence and start protecting your boundaries. By the second week, Danielle and her husband began moving out. Boxes appeared on the porch. Cribs and toys were packed and stacked neatly. Their exit was silent, except for the occasional dramatic sigh or muttered line meant for an imagined audience. I didn't watch them. I didn't need to. The quiet action spoke louder than any confrontation. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived, threatening legal action for emotional damages, alleging displacement, and even stress caused by the eviction. I forwarded it immediately to my lawyer. The response was swift, clear, and formal. No emotional engagement. No negotiation. Facts. Documentation. Legal authority. Danielle's calls stopped. Nate attempted one final plea at my office, but with one look, one word, he understood there would be no compromise. Throughout this period, Lucas remained a steady presence. He never interfered unnecessarily, never spoke for me, only offered calm reinforcement when the pressure mounted. It was his quiet support that reminded me I wasn't alone, but also that my voice, calm, measured and firm, was enough. The days that followed felt like a strange, peaceful limbo. Silence replaced manipulation. No guilt-laced messages. No emotional ambushes. Just space. The property manager confirmed the house had been vacated clean, orderly, and on time. It was a final, tangible confirmation that control, when exercised thoughtfully, produces results without chaos. And in that silence, I discovered something more profound than victory. I discovered freedom. Freedom from expectation, from judgment, from a lifetime of quietly absorbing humiliation. I could breathe, move, and exist without constantly shrinking to fit someone else's narrative. The world outside my home went on as always, indifferent to Danielle's drama, but inside, I had reclaimed my life. The brunch, once a symbol of exclusion, had become the catalyst for empowerment. The space I had been denied was now mine, not because they offered it, but because I claimed it. Weeks passed, and the echoes of the brunch faded into memory. No texts, no calls, no passive-aggressive attempts at reconciliation. Silence had become a kind of sanctuary, A rare clarity that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. The absence of Danielle, Nate, and the extended drama that usually accompanied family gatherings created space. Space I had desperately needed but never asked for. The property manager called one morning. "They're out. On time, no damage, clean. Everything as it should be." I thanked her calmly, hanging up with a sense of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't triumph in a dramatic sense. It wasn't revenge or schadenfreude. It was simple justice. Boundaries respected, life intact, and my dignity preserved. Lucas and I spent that weekend differently than usual. No phones. No interruptions. Just open windows, the smell of the ocean breeze drifting in, and long walks that required no small talk, no effort to belong, no invisible weight pressing against our chests. We ate meals slowly, deliberately, savoring the absence of obligation. The clarity I felt wasn't just external. It was internal. For decades, I had tied my self-worth to their perception, shrinking myself to fit the mold they had created. But now, after confrontation, after boundaries set and respected, I realized the truth. My worth had never depended on their approval. It depended on my own ability to claim space, to stand quietly but firmly in my own life, to demand respect without apology. Danielle attempted one final wave of influence. She drove past our street, phone in hand, sending messages that blurred apology with accusation. Lucas observed silently, only commenting, "It's performance. Don't engage." And I didn't. I had no energy for theatrics, no need to explain my choices. My peace wasn't something they could disrupt with performance or manipulation. The holiday season arrived quietly. No invitations, no cards, no forced smiles across the table. The usual anxiety I felt around family gatherings was replaced by calm. For the first time, I could focus on moments that mattered. Small celebrations at home, spontaneous coffee dates, long walks with Lucas, evenings filled with genuine conversation rather than obligation. I began to understand a deeper truth. Leaving wasn't failure. It wasn't betrayal. It was survival, it was clarity, it was freedom. The act of walking away, of choosing my space over their expectations, was a radical declaration of self-worth. It was not about punishment. It was about prioritizing peace over pretense, reality over appearances. When I finally drove by the house one last time, it looked untouched, like a shell of presence without substance. Empty windows reflected sunlight, the yard neatly maintained, nothing left to indicate a life had been lived there. I realized then that generosity is never a debt to be collected. It's a gift that can be offered or withdrawn without explanation. I boxed up the last of the old family photos, stored away digital accounts, updated emergency contacts. Each act was deliberate, a physical manifestation of the emotional boundaries I had drawn. There was no bitterness, no vengeance, only completion. That night, sitting on the porch with the ocean breeze whispering through the trees, I breathed deeply and smiled. The space I had carved out wasn't just physical. It was emotional, mental, spiritual. It was the freedom to live without shrinking, without apology, without the constant weight of expectation. Sometimes I reflect on that brunch. The awkward smiles, the clinking glasses, the invisible chair in the corner. Once, it had been a symbol of my exclusion. Now, it serves as a reminder. Life doesn't require me to accept invisibility. Sometimes the bravest act is simply claiming your rightful place, or walking away when no place is offered. And in that realization, I found the deepest peace. A freedom that no apology could grant, no drama could diminish, and no family hierarchy could deny. The brunch had ended long ago, but its lesson remained. Your worth is not negotiable, your space is not optional, and the courage to claim both is transformative. For the first time in years, I slept soundly, moved freely, and lived fully. Not in the shadow of expectation. Not in the corners of someone else's world. But in my own.